Is it about time we brought an end to zoos? Welcome to Activist. I'm Gareth.
And I'm Jackie. Today we talk to the inspirational Justin Barker, author of the brand new book called Bear Boy, which recounts his true story of how one teenage boy literally moved mountains to help liberate two bears.
In this interview, we talk about his story. It is so inspiring, so incredible. I wish I'd done more with my childhood, but learn more about it in this interview. Also, we talk about the use of media in creating these mountain shifts and bringing down some of these zoos. So if you enjoy this content, then smash that like button, drop a comment below, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to see more of these interviews and more of our vegan FTA content. We hope you enjoy this interview as much as we did. Thank you so much for joining us today, Justin. We can't wait to delve into your incredible story and learn more from the Bear Boy. In these interviews, we usually like to start out by asking about the moment that people went vegan, but we'd like to deviate from that slightly today and go back even further than that. Could you tell us about the defining moment you came across an old book in a secondhand store as a child and the effect that book had on you?
Well, life was pretty tough. Relatively tough. I was a middle-class white kid growing up in California. So relatively tough. But, as a young person, I was really bullied. I was fat and, I was just different. And so things were pretty tough living in the suburbs. And I was ready to just kind of tuck away and watch TV for the summer. And my dad, we were at a used bookstore and I actually found this book that Ingrid Newkirk wrote about 101 things kids could do to save the animals. And this is cliche, but that book literally changed my life. Obviously I wouldn't be sitting here with you today if I hadn't read that book. It just changed my life. And I opened the book and I started learning about the plight of animals. And not only that, the book really helped me become an activist. So it wasn't just there's all these terrible things happening in the world to animals. Here is something that you could do as a young person to take action. And it only took me getting to the chapter about how animals were treated, that meat was actually animals, for me to immediately change my habits around. So I went vegetarian at the time and then vegan eventually. And I instantly became an activist. And I've ever since that moment of discovering that book, I've been into animal rights, and then over the years have expanded that to social justice and all sorts of things. But that single book from Ingrid Newkirk changed my life, and I think has impacted a ton of animals' lives because of the activism that it's inspired in me.
Oh, that's so awesome. I loved reading it, having been lucky enough to read your book, and you've got a way of writing that just instantly transports you there. And I loved reading about, you didn't even want to go to that bookstore. The bookstore sucks. You didn't want to go there with your parents. And yet, this life-changing event happened for you. And it was just brilliant. I could just picture you just sitting there and discovering it. And as you say, that book has taken you on an amazing journey, which you've detailed in your own book, Bear Boy. And part of your first experience with captive animals in zoos was, you were talking about how you first met Penny, who was a black-footed cat at Sacramento Zoo 6 years before you discovered that book. You were a small child at the time. And I remember you describing how you went to the zoo and, everybody else was banging on the cages or whatever, or all excited, and you were crying even back then for her. So 6 years later, it must have been hugely distressing when you returned as a teenager and find that nothing had changed for her at all. In fact, it was worse. Could you share a little with our viewers about that experience?
Yeah, I was a pretty sensitive kid, and I always loved animals. I was concerned about what was happening in the rainforest. Jane Goodall's story was always just so interesting to me. And I was a sensitive kid. So going to the zoo and, that early experience of having this big kind of we were studying this animal that we adopted. Penny was a black-footed cat, and I think all of the studying and learning about her, I had this huge vision of like what her life would be like. And then to actually go to the zoo and experience that this cat is not even being properly cared for. It's living in, behind bars. And that was like, that was kind of like one of my early, like, oh, but nothing happened. I was in second grade, like I felt sad for Penny, but, didn't really know what to do with that experience. And it wasn't until I discovered the book years later and that actually kind of like, what am I trying to say? Justified or helped me I felt validated by those feelings that I had. And was like, oh, wow. Like now, not only do I feel those because I'm reading this book, I feel like I can now do something about that in a way that I didn't feel like I could when I was in second grade.
Well, we should mention that when you did return that 6 years later to the Sacramento Zoo, it wasn't part of another school or family outing, but, you set yourself the project to go back, and you had a self-titled Undercover Zoo Checker, which I absolutely love. What did your new job entail as a 12, was it, year then?
Yeah, 12, 13.
12, 13. Yeah. So I'd always been into the media. Like I talk about this in the book, but I befriended a journalist, and I was pretty into like journalism and the media. And so going to the zoo was like, I felt like I was an undercover like TV reporter or just a reporter, there was no cameras there, but I really like had this like desire to like uncover some facts and like continue to go, and the book from Ingrid kind of gave you some things to look at, like, make sure the animals, like, it's kind of enrichment, like make sure they have something engaging in their cage or that their like fur is healthy. That was kind of the extent of this zoo checker list. But for me, it turned into like an obsession, because I went and saw, I looked around this pretty bad zoo. Most zoos are pretty bad. And I just started to like go back every day. Like my dad would take me, and I would just kind of spend a lot of time at the cages. And then I talk about this in the book. I started asking zookeepers questions. And oddly, I don't know how this happened. It was like magic in some ways. Like I met the like kind of two zookeepers that were anti the zoo director. Like they, because I believe from my experience with zoos, there's the management side, and then there's like zookeepers who, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of zookeepers are in it to help animals and like want the best for animals. And there's kind of, I've experienced often this kind of shift between like how zookeepers and zoo director, there's just two different intentions, I think. And that was my first experience at the Sacramento Zoo. These zookeepers were like, oh, there's a lot going on here. And it took a little time to build some trust, and they kind of just spilled the beans. And by spilling the beans and sharing all the problems that were at the Sacramento Zoo, that helped me. I was able to develop this pretty long list of issues that eventually I was able to get to a local animal rights organization, and they helped me get it into the media. So it was pretty cool for me as a young person to be able to like engage with and push and actually like see that just a little bit of investigating and networking goes a really long ways in actually creating change. And that kind of like launched me into my work to see like, oh, wow, this work showing up every day like pays off.
It's so inspiring.
It's brilliant.
I love But I actually see it quite a bit in throughout vegan groups as people say how they've gone to become a veterinarian and then going through the training, then they realize that there is this a twist, like a different shift in people who go there because they love animals, and then they see what's then happening to them, not necessarily just in vets, but other animals. And as I say, like a lot of zookeepers, a lot of anyone who wants to go and work, even some farmers, they go into it because they love animals, and then they either get entrenched with the what would you call it, the
conditioning,
the conditioning of those industries, and then continue on with that. Or there's those who usually split away if they understand that they're not conditioned, they understand still the love between the animals, often they get out. But then there is that fine line of people who stick in it to stay with the animals and try and do the best for them, whilst trying to, eventually overturn the tables. It's so fantastic that you were there and able to help that happen.
It's awesome. And I love, like you say, your childhood wasn't the easiest growing up, but I loved how, despite everything, your parents were really supportive with you doing that at the start. Your parents were pretty cool, I have to say, in a lot of ways. And as a child with a different worldview to the majority, you took it upon yourself to do everything possible for the animals. And like you said, your parents were taking you to the zoo every day. Going against the grain as an adult is hard enough. But as a child, I can't begin to imagine the struggle. I just love the way that you spoke up from the start. And we're fortunate as a movement to have many young activists who are becoming strong voices for the animals, but there are also many who are made to feel sort of alone and outcast from their normal sort of peers. Do you have any advice for any of our younger viewers about pushing forward with what you feel is right, even if that means pushing away what's, conventional?
I mean, I think that's the only thing to do, honestly, and is to push away the conventional at this point, because so much of what is the norms in our society just isn't working for anyone. And I think that we're experiencing that across the board. So and that's why I wrote Bear Boy, was because I hope there's so many young people. I feel pretty good about our future based on how engaged young people are, and how just with it, even just within the animal rights group community, seeing how young animal activists are talking about animal rights, and there's this intersectionality to it, and they're just pushing. I don't know. I'm digressing here. I guess I would just say that it's really important. Youth is an awesome time to create change in the world, and to I love the idea of you don't eat like your parents. Don't do the same things your parents do. Find out what works for you and what is more ethical and what is better for the world and yourself, and all sorts of things. So, it's funny because I think we all have a lot to learn from young people. And I even I'll just say that as I'm almost 40 years old, and I feel I'm still getting inspired by my younger self and by younger people. It's trippy to look back and see how unfiltered I was, and why how unfiltered so many young people are. They're just not weighed down by the expectations, and so just speak up and resist the norms, and life will be so much better. It's kind of harder, and it takes a little bit to find your groove. But for me, that's the only reason why I'm okay today, was that I found something that I was passionate about, and that passion allowed me to do so many things in my life that I would have never had opportunities to do. And none of this would be happening if I was just I kind of just stuck to the norm and didn't do what I felt was really right inside. And that's what I love about youth, is how amazing and like thoughtful and creative and like ambitious young people are. They inspire me every day.
It's fantastic. Yeah. It's so true. I mean, we really, when I was growing up, when I was 13, I went vegetarian when I was 13, but I didn't kind of think beyond that. I didn't see that I wanted everybody else to change, but I didn't feel that I had the power to do that. When I read what you were doing at 13, you had a Rolodex with a, network of 100 adults that all listened to you. I had a job washing dishes, hated vivisection, but just thought, right, well, I'm going to stop eating meat. And that's my taking a stand, but there's so much more than that. And these days we are learning so much more from younger people. Adults don't know it all. We've done quite a bad job of a lot of things.
Yeah, there's so many great activists, like there's Activist, Genesis Butler, Vegan Evan. Yeah. So many of these young guns, like just getting out there and absolutely giving them hell, which is fantastic. We hope to feature more of them on the show as time goes on. It's just trying to get hold of them between the activism and schoolwork, and then it's hard to get hold of them. But persistence pays off is a sentiment that you give in your book in regards to dealing with adults and officials when trying to bring about change with the zoos. Over the course of the series, we've talked with multiple advocates about how frequency of activism can often be the best way to highlight a cause. You need your high-reaching and impactful events, those single actions, but, as a teenager, you were both cheeky and inspiring in your pursuits. And would you advise activists today to be as tenacious as you were?
I mean, tenacity is the only thing that actually, gets to the finish line. I guess it's like the one thing that I learned as an activist then and now is that the destination, the goal, the end goal, this is me being very optimistic, but I really believe that the goals that we all set as activists will be achieved. But it's the thing that we're not in control of is the timeline, that it's the in that spirit, not ever giving up and just continuing to push forward, and celebrating the small wins. That is how you achieve the ultimate goal. And I love the idea that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. I really believe that it may take a long time to achieve really big systematic change that we all hope for and we all are focused on. But it's just trotting along and just moving forward and taking steps and looking around and being dang, this is we're in such a different era in 2020 than we were 10 years ago around veganism. It blows my mind. And so tenacity and just a focus on the outcome is what we all have to do as activists.
I love that. And, I just loved reading your whole journey. And as Gareth said, it was brilliant how from the start you went to Sacramento Zoo and there were adults that were willing to talk to you. It got me thinking, what would happen if I went to my zoo? Would people let me in? Would people be willing to talk? You just never know. And it's led to this wonderful chain of events and you're finding your tribe and these wonderful people that were able to sort of guide you and get you from A to B and well beyond. And one of the things that you wrote about was, discovery of the Freedom of Information Act, which was pivotal in some of your early activism. This act allows anyone to request information from the government. And in doing so, the relevant federal agency is then required to respond within 20 business days, unless there are unusual circumstances. So this seems like a huge asset to the animal rights movement. Would this still be relevant to today's activists?
I think that in access to information, there's all over the world, there's both like local, state, and federal laws that kind of mandate bodies to release information. And from my experience, it's like a good stepping stone. It's not, I think that I'll have an example. Like I've spent the last 2 years trying to get documents from the San Francisco Zoo. I'm here in San Francisco, and the San Francisco Zoo is one of the worst zoos, I'm just going to say it, on earth, in my opinion. It's a terrible zoo. It's terribly run. And both local and state laws require that they release information. And I have a very long list. I wish I had it in front of me, because I have a very long list of requests that they are required to hand over that would essentially, if they actually did and followed the law, it would be very eye-opening about the state of the zoo. Because if you ask the right question, at the time when I was younger, I used the USDA. They go in and inspect zoos. They inspect all sorts of facilities that exploit animals, and it's just like those, because the laws and the requirements through the USDA is such a low threshold that you're actually never going to fully understand the state of things because the laws just don't do enough to protect animals. So you get a little glimpse into the state of things. But I think that it's a good start. Like at some point, I'm now 2 years into my battle to get the documents requested from the San Francisco Zoo. And I've asked questions like, I want the list of all of the medications that have been purchased at the San Francisco Zoo. I want to know every single animal that is on antipsychotics. Like I could create a list, start compiling a list of things to, if you ask the right questions and get if you're approaching those requests right, that I think there's a lot to be gained and to understand. So this battle has now, at the San Francisco Zoo, they should have passed over these documents 2 years ago, but now it's getting pushed through our local government, and we may have to sue to get those documents released. But once that happens, that is that trove of information is going to be huge because it's going to really give us an understanding of what the state of that zoo, the state of animals. We already know how bad it is through just the news reports and what's happening there. But this will give an even bigger picture. So it is a very long answer to, I think that records request is an awesome opportunity and one approach to understand what's happening within facilities and what's happening behind closed doors. But it's just one sliver, one aspect. And the one thing I'll say is, so this effort to get the San Francisco Zoo documents, I will now be able to say that a pseudo-judicial body of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors has found the San Francisco Zoo in violation of city, state, and in violation of their lease agreement with the city. And to me, that's news right there. That's that is one of those small wins that I will be moving forward to send out to the media as a thing that our zoo is in violation of city, state, and in violation of its contract. And that to me is a good news story. So it's kind of the steps, it's one step. And there's so many more steps to go before we actually achieve the goals that I hope for at the San Francisco Zoo. But I think that records requests are great.
That's wonderful. Like, for me, I always tend to process information quite sort of visually, and so in my head, it like when we're talking about some of these activist and advocacy oppositions, it's almost like a sheer wall that we're trying to scale. And with you saying that, it makes me think, like this is what will let us see the cracks in the wall. This is what will get us a handhold in the wall. This is that slowly chipping away. It's the earth slowly shaking, the wall coming apart. It's fantastic. And yeah, I think it's something we should all be utilizing. I know out here the vivisection down the South Island, they recently opened a new lab, and it'd be great to try and request more information on that. I believe for the New Zealand AVS Society, I believe that's probably what a lot of what they do is trying to get that information. And so if there's anybody out there who likes to write letters, then you can possibly be a forefront for this kind of digging. It's wonderful. I love that. And it goes into as well your first animal rights organization, which you started in high school, and it was called Claws, Citizens Lobbying Against Zoos. How cool is that? I wish I had done something remotely useful as a kid. But so people began writing into you and requesting help with animals in various situations. And this is how you met Brutus and Ursula, two bears who would go on to shape your life as an activist and cement the methods that you use. The use of the media, which you've already touched on to now, is a topic that we've delved into quite a lot through the course of this series. But we'd love to know what you have found effective when communicating with the media and why it's so important that we utilize them.
I mean, the media to me is like, I'll just say, like, I think the media is in a really awkward, weird spot right now. There used to be, I don't know if it's like this in New Zealand, but in the US, we're just seeing serious consolidation of the media. Like where there used to be a local newspaper everywhere, we're just seeing them disappear and gobble up. So I think the media, local media in particular, is like an incredibly important tool that activists need to use, because it starts like, back to the like one foot in front of the other, and the idea of like small victories, like just small stories in local newspapers or on local blogs. Like it chips away, like you're saying, like the more like people like hear these stories and empathize with them, we're both like growing our network of activists or allies, but also it holds politicians and it holds like abusers accountable, that there's some sort of, the laws are often not strong enough to actually like protect animals or hold people accountable for the neglect and the abuse and the exploitation. And the media often is that an opportunity to do that. And so I'll just say that as an animal activist, I actively, even though there's, the New York Times is a corporate paper, like I am actively supporting journalism, because I think that's first and foremost. I'm financially supporting local newspapers, like local and independent newspapers. So that's one thing I think that we need to be doing is supporting journalism and making sure that like we don't see local journalism eliminated. And how I've always approached it is, I was a little more rambunctious as a young person. I would just like call on my landline, I'd just call a reporter constantly, endlessly, and like harass them until they did a story. Like, it's not exactly how to approach it, but we're in this world right now. I'm actually like actively marketing Bear Boy. Like I want to get this book into as many hands as possible, and media is how I'm going to do that, I think. And so my approach is to like think about what a journalist's needs are, and like, the level, how many stories that they need to churn, and like how busy they are. I don't know, I often, instead of just like pitching a press release, I'm like, hey, like what kind of stories are you looking for these days? Or like, what's interesting? Like, what is your audience like? So it's like, I have my goals, but I'm often trying to understand like what their goals are. And we're in this era where, at the time with Bear Boy in the 90s, like this, for example, the Sacramento Bee had a massive newsroom. And I could call the Metro desk and talk to somebody and pitch like stories all the time. And it's a different world now. Like the Sacramento Bee's newsroom has shrunk dramatically and everyone's stretched thin. So like, I'll just be transparent about what I'm doing with Bear Boy. I have like hired a photographer to take pictures that the newspapers can use. Like, I think that like the more activists can actually make the lives of journalists easier. So like making sure that you're pitching ideas and stories that feel like are interesting to those journalists, and then doing all the work you could possibly do to make their life easier is like how to get in like to get stories told and placed. And then also just like, I mean, PETA is famous for this, like just the more compelling and interesting and like flashy, like that. I mean, that works for some things. I don't think that's necessarily how every story needs to be pitched, but just to understand the state of our journalism, I think, and the challenges that journalists face, I think will go a long ways in getting stories placed.
That's brilliant advice there.
Yeah.
And
someone who works in the media, I totally agree. Yeah, the easier you can make it for them, that is, yeah.
And I'll recap onto when we spoke to Captain Paul Watson, and he spoke on this topic as well. And he said about the 4 points for a super story, which is celebrity, controversy, violence, and sex. If you have one of those elements, they're more likely to pick it up. And if you have all 4 of them, well, then you got a front page thing. And once again, it doesn't necessarily work with everything that we're doing, but say you've had a protest or demonstration, it's caused controversy in the local community. That's something they might pick up on. Someone's been violent to one of their members. That's another element of it. There's so many different ways. And having that, trying to look at it from the journalist point of view and taking it from their shoes, such a great way to look at it and to work your way into it. Because, we've got to use these systems that are already there in order to propel our own movement, really.
Yeah, it's brilliant advice. I think, we meet so many people who've got so much to offer and they don't think that their story is big enough or important enough, and like you say, it's those small stories that matter. They really do.
It is. And I think one thing I'll say is that it's like about anything, it's relationship building. So it's not just about, like you don't want to just be a source for one story one time. You like want to build a relationship with like the storytellers in your community, whether they're journalists or, writers, because then you become like, oh, wow, like that one thing we did with so-and-so, like they're now my like source, and we're building a relationship. And so like one thing with the San Francisco Zoo, there's a few journalists in San Francisco that I've like kept updated throughout the process. And I know that it's like nothing up until this point has been like newsworthy email, but they know that like have been at this for 2 years. And then at some point, whatever, I'll message them, text them, email them. And at some point that long relationship that I've kind of been building will pay off as a story. So it's like kind of like I think that like the relationships that we can build are much more important than like single story placement.
Yeah, that's once again so true with that. And often it comes up, especially like here in New Zealand, we have, it's not what it's who is often a huge factor in whatever you do. And I'm sure it proves to be true everywhere you go. And once again, you're so many of your tactics and stuff like that are long haul ones, but they're so effective when they do come into play. And that's the thing, we need people doing these things. And yeah, it may not be changed instantly, but when it hits hard, and that's what I like to see.
So a huge part of Claw's work was to fundraise for animals it was trying to save. And in the case of Brutus and Ursula, the two bears that you were trying to free, a massive $250,000 was needed to be raised in order to give them a new home and, you know, a new lease on life. The trials of seeking the funds in your book, Bear Boy, will keep readers on their toes, but don't want to ruin the story for everyone else. So there's a final point that, you know, would be great to delve into, which is the kindness of strangers. And if it wasn't for the kindness of strangers, you know, Vegan FTA, we wouldn't be what it is today. And neither would any sort of charity or nonprofit organization. When faced with the task of fundraising, an individual's kindness can make a huge amount of difference. But, you know, we can't rely on them coming out of the blue to just support us, no matter how much we would like that to happen. Do you have any tips to share with our activists to help them fundraise? What was effective for you?
You know, I really like this idea. Like, so Brutus and Ursula's story was very specific about the state of their state, how terrible their conditions were, was the compelling story. But for me, what was more important to me was that I was actually talking about like the state of all captive animals. And so I really think that, and I was actually talking to Matt from Sentient Media, and there's this idea of zoom in and zoom out. And I really like the simplicity of that. And so I think that the more that these big ideas that we're trying to achieve as activists, the more that we can hone in on specific stories, makes it makes it so much more accessible to understand as individuals, animals' plight, or you know, for in Brutus and Ursula's state, the two bears, their plight. People really are able to like grab onto that more than like the idea that captivity is bad. So I think that like for fundraising, it was really, I'm sure there was plenty of people that sent me money that like may not exactly like agree about how I feel about like that we should probably close down zoos, you know, but they were able to like empathize with like how bad Brutus and Ursula's conditions were, and it inspired them to send money. And so I think that that's one advice I have, is that like how do you simplify stories and make sure that you're telling individuals, animals' stories as part of a larger idea. And also, you know, I've studied this a little bit, and I think they found that like while like the stories, the really sad stories about animals like resonate with people, they don't necessarily create there's kind of this like instant reaction and people donate. But I think that like inspiration is what like creates longer term like financial commitments in movements. And so there's a place for like, obviously like the work that as animal activists, there's sad stories that have to be told, and that will pull on people's heartstrings. But that can't be the only mechanism for inspiring donations. There has to be like these larger inspirational narratives that like keep people donating. So those are the kind of the two ideas that I feel like have been like that I've kind of recognized in my time.
It's absolutely fantastic to know, and yeah, it's great to understand more about that. And
yeah,
it makes me think about that whole thing of trying to make sure you're targeting your audience correctly, because as you say, it's sort of tilting that focus. If you're appealing to a different group, the more general public, you know, maybe the harder hitting stuff might not work as well. Maybe they want a bit more soft fluffies, you know, that might bring them on board. It makes me think, even just in the last couple of days, doing a Facebook post and having people like it, and you're doing an activist post, you may get your family and friends who know nothing about your cause, know no reason, like they have no understanding of what's going on, but then they still like and engage because they've liked the photo or something like that. There's those other elements of the story there that, you know, has brought them in. And so, yeah, having that target on your audience is fantastic. But despite being active for so many years and such an incredible advocate for the animals, the completion of Bear Boy marks your professional life finally meeting with your true passion for advocacy. What was it that started off your 10-year journey to writing this book?
So, you know, it's interesting. I was living in San Francisco and I was doing this 40-day retreat or yoga retreat. And so I was still at home, but we were going in and we were doing a daily meditation and yoga practice. And the very last day of this yoga retreat, they're like, we're going to do the death meditation. And I was like, okay, that sounds kind of weird. But we sat down and each of us got handed a box of tissues. I was like, okay, this is interesting. And so there was somebody in that room and they start beating this drum to like the heartbeat. And the teacher's like, you have 12 hours to live. And like just telling the story right now, like all the hairs are going up on my body. And it's like, what'd you regret? You know, who'd you wish you would have seen again? Like, what do you wish you would have done? And I was like literally overwhelmed with this sense that I never helped another zoo animal, because up until that point, I'd been so focused on like the bears inspired me to go into the media. And so I'd been in like working in the media as a producer and kind of like in that field, not necessarily completely not focused on animal rights professionally. And the idea that I never helped another zoo animal, like that I was at the end of my life and that I never helped another zoo animal, like was so overwhelming to me. And like, I'm sobbing and I'm like writing down like this idea. And like within days of that, I was like, I have to tell this story. Like I have to tell the story of the bears because I want to, like, I never told it. Everyone else told the story but myself. And I never thought that was going to take 10 years to write, but it did. And now it's crazy to think like I started when I was 29 and I'm now 39. I'm almost 40 years old. And I'm telling this story that happened to me when I was like 13 to 17. But yeah, it feels like really good. It feels like good. I've continued my work. That it wasn't just the book that I was writing. I continued my work to advocate for those animals at San Francisco Zoo. But yeah, it's a trip to like be able to like spend much of my career storytelling, and to be able to have this book be the intersection of that, of like my life as a storyteller and my life as an animal activist. And then it's like a few days away from being in the world for anyone to have access to is, it's very, I'm kind of overwhelmed and excited by it all. Like it's a trip. It's a trip.
It's brilliant. Like I say, you know, I feel everyone should read this book. It is honestly the most inspiring and uplifting book I have ever read. I just love it. It's what you did, you know, as a teenager is absolutely amazing. It really is. I mean, the magnitude of what you achieve, you know, the sanctuary that ended up taking Brutus and Ursula, you know, they had to raise $250,000 before for, you know, for another species of animal. And that took 5 years. So, you know, when you were faced with this goal, I was thinking, oh, that, you know, too big. How, you know, like I said, we can't give away how it all came together, but you know, the magnitude of what you've done is just absolutely incredible. And, you know, I think, yeah, when I look back to what I was like at 13, I wish I'd been different now, you know. And it's great. I really feel that, you know, your book, your story and your inspiration and everything that you've learned can really help to motivate and teach a new generation, you know, how to find their voice and not to be silenced by us silly adults that don't know any better, you know. But we're so happy to see, like you say, you've rekindled your work to help the animals in zoos. And for people across the world, I think there's no better time than now really to connect with captive animals than being put in a captive state ourselves through lockdowns the way we have, albeit in much better conditions. Have you found returning to help captive animals a sense of the general public being more in favor of your cause now?
That's a good question. I think that I'm so curious because I have vegan friends who are raising vegan kids who still take their kids to the zoo. And that's real mystery to me, because I think, what I've learned is that the zoo industry is so ingrained in our lives that it has been that it's so normalized, and that the publishing industry from very has created kids books that celebrate the zoo, that every time you turn on the TV, even a zoo animal that's born on the other side of the earth makes the news, and that there's no critical thinking around what are we doing, and somehow the zoo industry has basically gone unchecked in their claim to be participating in conservation. The idea that by going to the zoo we're creating little conservationists, I just don't buy it. And we still while we've seen the circus close, the Ringling Circus close here in the States, and while there's pushback against SeaWorld, I certainly think there's more questions being raised about the zoo industry and the role it plays in our lives. But I think that there's a long ways to go before we're actually seeing the industry transition the way we're seeing so many other industries transition. And I really that's partly why I wrote this book, was because I want to be part of the dialogue where we're we're asking really hard questions about why do we have zoos? Why do we think it's okay to take our kids to stare at animals in cages? And then I also just would say that we're also in a state where we're rapidly losing animals and habitat. So then there has to be a dialogue around what are we doing to protect animals, because just keeping captive populations is not conservation. So that's my long answer to that. I think that we're heading in the right direction, but there's still so many things that need addressing around how normal it is that every major city on the planet has a zoo.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've been to zoos on both sides of the world. I've been as a child, I've been as an adult, I've taken my own children along. And I don't think, no matter how wonderful the experience is supposed to be, I don't think that there's ever been a time at any of those ages and stages that I thought those animals are happy, or they've got enough room, or they've got enough stimulation, everything we need. I even remember, I think might have seen bears, polar bears, I think in the UK when I was little, and they were in this big kind of like a pit. We had to look down to see them. And I remember sort of thinking, even then I would have only been about 9 years old. And I remember sort of thinking, well, how can that's not what polar bears are supposed to do. That's not how they're supposed to live. So, and yet, like you say, we're fed this whole conservation kind of.
It seems to be the blanket that's covering it is that conservation sort of thing. And the thing is, if they truly are there to conserve them, it still doesn't mean they have to be an entertainment place for humans. With the technology that we have with cameras, if you want people to see these in an actual conservation, you say breeding the final pair of them, if you want people to see the animals, the cameras can get a better image, and you can see with the eyes now when you go to them. Most of these places, because you're viewing them from a distance, you're viewing them through cages. It's absolutely horrible. It makes me think, though, we need old Ali and Lucy Tabrizi to get on here and do Zoospiracy next, you know.
That'd be great.
And because I kind of feel like it's almost like the plastic straw thing, you know, like they revealed with Seaspiracy, you know, like, oh yes, we're doing our part here, you know, with conservation and stuff, and then really there's a much bigger depth to it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea. That's a good
I'm ready to produce that documentary.
Excellent.
I'll put my hand up right now.
That sounds fabulous.
Yeah, because that will be like a shocking documentary. Like the state of the zoo and the reality check that people will have to face around like zoos, like that. I want the Blackfish of the zoo industry. Like that documentary must be made.
Well, I cannot think of anybody more perfect to create that documentary. So yes, please add that to your to-do list, as well as, you know, everything else you're doing. I would love to know, though, I was saying to Gareth this morning, you know, I'd love to know how things, because I just loved reading about you at that time in your life. Like, you were so tenacious and just didn't give up, you know. And there was a time when you you went away for 6 months when you were traveling with your parents, and you know, you had to let somebody else take up the banner for the bears and help fundraise. And it was a real case of disappointment when you come back, you know, that you realize if you want something done, you know, you got to do it yourself. And you've never stopped. You know, you were just always so brave, you know, and putting yourself out there. And I'd love to know now, you know, how things have changed in your approach, you know, from being a child and now being an adult. You know, you're fighting for the same cause, but how's your approach changed?
I mean, honestly, I don't think very much. I think, and I'll say that one of the stories in the book is about a bank that helped me out. This is like maybe like sharing too much, but I reached out to the bank because it's a real bank. And, you know, I think in general, banks can be questionable, but this bank in particular is really working towards, I think that it feels like they're trying to step it up. Long story short, I reached out to their head of brand and I was like, hey, would you be interested in like helping get this book into the world? And he's like, what would you like? And I sent the most obscenely long request list that, like, if they say yes to all those things, I'd be like, wow. But like, I was thinking about it and I was like, wow, like, I feel like not much has changed. Like, you have to be ambitious. You have to like reach for them, like stars and the moon. Because maybe like the middle ground is like what you get, but like if you don't like reach for the big things, then like you never actually like find the middle ground. So I guess I would just say that I still make myself laugh, honestly, because I'm often inspired by like Bear Boy, and I'm not Bear Boy. I am like I'm Justin, and that younger version of me is not me, you know, but it's weird. It's a weird thing. But it makes me laugh sometimes. And I'm like, there's essence. The young Bear Boy is still here. And like, I still make ridiculous requests to people and like bug the media in a way that I did before. And so, yeah, I guess like that, I forget what your question was.
Oh, just how the approach has changed.
Rambling on here.
No, not at all. I guess what it comes down to is that, you know, you know from the younger Justin that it gets results. So, you know, it's if it ain't broken.
Yeah, I think that just like really like being ambitious in like your vision and what you ask of people, because the worst thing that's going to happen is no. And like as I'm doing like outreach for this book, like I really believe like every no leads to the yes. So I think that like get fueled by the no's, because like the more no's or the more like failures or whatever it is, like the more of those that we can like grab onto and let go of, like you're just leading to that like yes, or to that success. So I think that's like the biggest thing for me was just like I got like Bear Boy gobbled up nose, and like that's what I was able to do. I was like, I'm going to prove these adults that like they're wrong. Like these bears are going to be moved, and like I, as a young person, can do that. And so we all need that. We all need to like believe in ourselves and know that like we're going to face challenges because we're trying to create change in the world. And the more that we can like keep stepping in the direction, no matter like if it feels like we're walking through molasses, the more that we just keep moving in towards that more ethical future that we all know is possible. Then I think that we'll get there.
I love that, and I love the sort of saying you brought up there just before about the whole thing of you reaching for the stars. And I actually remember my mum telling me that as a kid, the whole thing of if you reach for the stars, if you fall, you hopefully won't fall too far from that goal. And it's a brilliant way to go through life. That and is there? We're wondering, is there any current campaigns that you have going that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, I'm working on the San Francisco Zoo right now. I would say like, I don't have any like the Bear Boy is my campaign right now. Like bringing this book into the world and making sure that it gets into as many young people's hands as possible is like, I really believe this book is my activism right now. And it took a long time to get to that point. So I would say that like making sure that like the next Justin or the next kid who's like struggling is able to get their hands on this book is like my current campaign. But I'm hoping that by like this book's out in the world in June and and that like my big campaign is to dramatically change the San Francisco Zoo. And I hope by dramatically shifting and shining a light on the problem at the San Francisco Zoo really helps shine a light on the larger zoo industry. And so that's my campaign. My local zoo, creating change at my local zoo is like what I'm focused on. And I would love if anyone is passionate about creating change at their local zoo to like reach out to me because I would love to help. I would love to build a network of folks who are like holding their local zoo accountable and shining a light on the problems at their local zoo because that's how we're going to ultimately create like global change in the zoo industry. So my focus is local, and I'd love to help other people do the same.
That's awesome. That's very cool. I'm kind of thinking, watch out, Auckland Zoo. I've got you on my radar. I just want to say thank you so much to 13-year-old Justin for everything that he did. And, thank you to the Justin of today for everything that you continue to do, And I mean, I love the book. I love also, you've mentioned the book that you and the wonderful Jane Goodall have got a mutual admiration of one another that has spanned for quite a few years now. She's even written the foreword to your book, which is, incidentally, we must let everyone know, where can everyone get a copy of your book?
So you can go to bearboy.org, which is like the place you could find where the book is. But essentially, it's available all over the world. And I really want to support local bookstores. So all you have to do is actually just like reach out to your local bookshop and say, hey, I'd like a copy of Bear Boy by Justin Barker. And that's all you have to do. Like it's available anywhere, like any major bookseller. This may be a little ambitious to say on Earth. I don't think like I'm sure there's areas where you're not going to be able to get Bear Boy, but like it kind of just like Australia, New Zealand, Europe, the US, it's available at your local bookstore by just asking for it.
That's fantastic. And please folks, get out there and support your local bookstores and get an ask for this. And I was also thinking one way as well we can support you in your campaign to get out there more even if you're not in a position to buy 500 copies, you can still request that your library gets it in as well. And then also your local schools request that they put it on the reading there for it. So, with a couple of little letters, a couple of emails, whatever you want to send out, or even a phone call.
I've actually done that with our local library already.
Yeah,
as soon as I finished, I was like, right.
Yeah, you can support the book that way too. And is there anywhere else that we can go to check out what you're doing and follow you?
I'm on social media at Justin Barker TV, and on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook, but I'm on Instagram, and you can always just send me an email too, through or just send me a message on any one of those channels, because I love connecting with other activists and people that have read the book. I'd live to connect with people that are passionate about these things, just like I am. So.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you'd like to support our speaker, then follow the links provided in the description. If you're enjoying this content, then please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave a like on our videos or drop a comment with something that you've learned. Your love and support means the world to us, and we thank you all for watching this.